Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Greco, and I wanted to thank you for attending today's webinar, Improving Information Literacy in R&D. We have a really engaging session planned for you today, but before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to review with you to ensure a smooth session. First, this session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be available for you a few days after the webinar and will be shared with you via email. Second, all attendee lines are muted to avoid any sound feedback or interruptions. If you're having any difficulties hearing during the webinar, please use the chat box to communicate with me, and I will work with you to try to resolve the issue. Third, we will have time for a Q&A session following Joe's presentation. If you do have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat box at any time during his presentation to me directly. And then finally, please stay on the line once the webinar is finished. You will be able to request more information on tools to help improve information literacy in your company. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest. Joe Tragert is a Senior Director of Product Management here at EBSCO. Joe has been developing research databases and products with EBSCO for more than 20 years. He is also a 19-year adjunct professor and a consultant on information use and workflow optimization. Joe, I will now pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for this hour today. My name is Joe Tragert. I have been at EBSCO a long time. And this topic, information literacy, and how working together, librarians and vendors can deliver that information literacy to our constituents is very near and dear to me, and I hope that this session will be useful for you. We get some good discussion when we're done. So the two objectives today are to look at some ways that we can diagnose or understand how employees today search and evaluate information, particularly in the R&D space, and then see some treatments for user experience that may help you as a librarian to devise techniques and tools that enable your research constituents to have a more information-literate information outcome. So content today, we're going to take a minute and dust off the textbook and talk about what information literacy is as a classic definition. We'll talk about search habits observed by EBSCO and also as written by others. I want to share with you some perspective that some of my colleagues have put toward what the personas are for corporate researchers, and I think you might find it rather interesting. We'll talk about the notion of the information literacy gap as it currently exists in the workplace and some practices to close that gap, and that'll be both practices that you as librarians can take or we as vendors can take with you, and then we'll talk about some examples with user experience and that do that as well, and hopefully there's some time for conversation. So quickly, information literacy is a term that's been around for a long time, and I'm sure most of you who have a library degree or library background would know what this is, but comes from Paul Zurkowski, and it's been around for 40 years more. The idea that I always find most compelling about information literacy is Zurkowski's discussion of information in the last sentence. As beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so information is in the mind of the user. What he's talking about there is the notion of sense-making, that when our colleagues are in an R&D process, they're often trying to discover a new use for an existing technology or a new technology to achieve an end. Oftentimes it's iterative experimentation, but all along the way there's notions of discovery and of exploration. But ultimately they're making a connection in their own minds between data or observations they have at one point in time to data and observations they made at a different point in time. The human mind is really unique in this way, that it can do that. It can connect things across time and distance to make a single understanding that was not achieved before. And all this machine learning and artificial intelligence, we hope to be able to do the same kind of thing. But as librarians, as information experts, if we can enable those users to achieve that kind of sense-making in whatever their own perspective is, I think that's ultimately our objective, and that's where information literacy comes in. So to me, the idea is we need to be where they are. We have to get the information into their workflows. And that's two different things to consider. One is the actual process they follow. So if for an R&D, for example, what is the R&D workflow that they're participating in? What tools are they using? What software? What methodology? Also, it's device specific. How are they getting at the information, and what particular tools are they using? And those tools will limit or enhance presentation of particular information types. And that's a constant moving target, as we know. So Drucker puts it very well that we got to remember what we're really here to do, which is, again, is to create that sense-making opportunity. And what we really want to focus on is not just the information or the gadgets they may use, to use Drucker's term, but really it's what is the ultimate role here? It is to help someone work with all the resources at their disposal, including their colleagues in the organization, to best create that understanding that they seek. So when we think about information literacy, there's really two sets of factors, if you will, that you need to look at if you look at this resource. So Tuckett describes it as information literacy is both the set of skills that help you to work with information, but also the ability to create strategies by which one organizes those skills in order to create the information you need. So one is the set of skills is you have to be a very good carpenter, use all the tools of carpentry well. The second is you have to be a good architect to design the house that you're building. So we specialize so much. We're good at using tools or we're good at designing, but then we're asking our end users to be both of those people at the same time. And that's a difficult challenge for a lot of people to be able to do that. So to the extent we can help a carpenter be an architect or vice versa, that's really part of our job as well, as both the vendor or the librarian. So the ACRL, and you've probably all seen this in various iterations over the years, this is the 2014 definition of information literacy from at the higher education level, five-step process. And I won't read the steps off to you, but it's something you're probably all familiar with. But essentially, it's determining what you want, determining how best to access that information, knowing whether you got the good information or not, using it effectively with your peers or alone, and then doing it in a legally, an economically feasible and legally responsible manner. Interestingly enough, the workplace information literacy skill set is defined much more loosely because there isn't that single body, there isn't an ALA and ACRL that sits there and says, this is what information literacy means in the workplace, to the same extent we have it in academia, though obviously it's very close. So this is something from a journal, Australian Library Journal, where these two authors say this is what information literacy means in the workplace, essentially the same thing as we saw on the slide before. The key thing here, though, is step 4, which they've inserted in here explicitly, devising an information use strategy. So we get into this question of when we're in the workplace and we're using information in an R&D process in particular, we don't want to flail around. This isn't about necessarily throwing the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Oftentimes, these researchers have very specific needs or very specific processes they intend to follow. And we want to help them devise the right strategy to meet those needs so that their use is more efficient and less exploratory, unless, of course, they're in an exploration mode. But very often they're in a known item search process or they're in an iterative search process where they don't want to be fascinated every time they get in there. They want to see the deltas between what they saw the time before and the time now. So the strategy part is as important as the rest of the tools that we provide, including things like number 5, filtering tools, limiters, expanders, etc. Number 6, how we present content on screen so the end user can take it back and do things with it. So we talk about two factors which are not really present in the academic sense, and that is collaboration and optimization. The collaboration notion is that we encourage end users to work with their peers because a lot of information that's needed, particularly for devising strategies, may not be found online, but may be found in the mind of someone who's been at the company a long time or in the mind of the librarian that they talk to if they're lucky enough to get a chance to talk to you. So collaboration is a key component to effective, I would say, for information literate research. The second part of this thing is that we need to adjust what people see depending on what they want when they want it. In a university setting, very often a student logs onto the university system. The interface is what it is. It doesn't change because of who they are. The features are the same features whether you're a grad student or a freshman or you're a full-time faculty member. So they don't have this notion that the system will bend for them or that the system can be modified to meet their needs. Whereas in a corporate setting, we want that system absolutely optimized for who's using it for the purposes that they need it for, because there's a direct bottom line correlation to how effective the information resource is and the quality of the outcomes at that company. So collaboration and optimization, something that workplace needs to focus on perhaps more than the university needs to focus on. So now we get into the problem. So that's the lay of the land in my view of what should happen. Now let's talk about the challenges we see today. So the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which is just what it sounds like, a group of colleges and hiring managers, routinely survey U.S. employers about what are the skills they want employees to have, particularly around working with information. So you see the top 5 skills that they wanted in the 2016, or actually it's the 2015 Outlook. Work together in a team, make decisions and solve problems, which again is about strategy, communicate well, collaborate, plan and prioritize work, again, creating a strategy for information, and then obtaining and processing information. So getting the right information and working effectively with it. This is what they want. Now, at the same time, many of you are probably familiar with Dr. Head and the Project Information Literacy Program, which has been going on for a decade at least. Anyway, one of her occasional reports from 2012, they spoke with employers about what do they think about new employees, new hires, ability to work with information. These are the 4 competencies that managers think new hires or younger researchers lack in the workplace. Can't work with teams, don't know how to get information from a variety of formats, don't know how to make patterns, and can't dive into the information beyond a surface scratch, a Google type search. So remember what we want them to be able to do, and here's what they can't do. So this speaks to a gap between desire and ability. The Association of Colleges and Universities, which represents primarily faculty and deans, does an employer survey as well every year. This is the 2018 results. And they ask them to rate what are the skills that you think are most important for hires to have. And that's the gold dots going down the right-hand side of this chart. On a scale of 1 to 100, how important, for example, is critical thinking and analytical reasoning? 78% important on a scale of 1 to 100. The blue dots are those same employers rating how well they think new employees execute on that skill. So what they think is that recent grads are only 34% prepared in the critical thinking and analytical reasoning area, where we want them to be 78% prepared. So there's a very large gap between how good we want them to be and how good they actually are. This is a numerical representation of what I've been talking about as an information literacy gap. We circled in green a couple of the elements that I think are more information literacy related, though a lot of these deal, again, with the whole flow of working with information. But clearly, critical thinking, applying knowledge and skills to real-world situations, and finding, organizing, and evaluating information from multiple sources directly relate to the challenge of working with information and being information literate. So here's our situation. So what do we do? I've been at this company a long time, and I talked to a lot of folks like yourselves about this challenge. And one of the things we realize is that very often the corporate librarian or information manager is really on their own. Managers are frustrated by the lack of ability of the staff sometimes to work with information, but they don't really understand how to articulate that problem. Managers, line managers and R&D people aren't versed in the concept of information literacy. They just want the information gathered. They want the research landscape created. They want the junior scientists to scan all the technologies that are out there to give them a state-of-the-art assessment. But they don't really empower them with the tools they need, nor can they even articulate effectively what those tools are. You, as a librarian, know what those tools mean. You know what they bucket under a thing called information literacy. But with the lack of a shared definition out there and with the lack of a common body like ALA or ACRL or someone else in academia to define and agree what those terms mean, yes, we have SLA and things, but it's different. We're stuck with trying to manifest this notion of best practices of using information without a common channel to figure out if we're doing it best or how to compare it to others really easily. So this is a challenge I know that you face in the corporate setting. And then, of course, that's coupled with the problem that lots of people don't want to share what they do because there's proprietary challenges involved as well, where we don't want others to know what we're doing. So how you can approach the problem. Some things that work pretty well is, I think you got to meet your researchers halfway. Go where they are and understand what they're good at and what they're bad at and take advantage of what you can there. This means understanding the persona of the people you're dealing with. And a persona is a descriptor that defines the state of mind and the idea of expectations and skills that a user may have. And ideally, personas can be applied across multiple people and organizations, and they can fit into these buckets. So one of the ways we can look at personas is look at how their level of investment and their level of skills. So investment is how much they care about what they're doing, and skills is how adept they are at doing it. And what you'll find is, depending on the situation, the same person can manifest different personas. They can be much more invested in one case or have great skills in one kind of searching but be terrible at something else. And what we often see with R&D is that these people might be excellent experimentation or lab professionals. They may be great at that level of research, but actually pretty poor at literature searching. So they're okay in the middle part of the process of research. They're pretty poor at the beginning part, where they're creating that research landscape or laying out the current state of the art of a technology. And very often they devote that process to some younger person, a junior scientist, to create that part of the work. They look at it as almost an obligatory part, but not necessarily an integral part of what they're doing. And we need to make that difference. Say, look, when you're working with information up front, you need to be better at that process because it will drive much of what you do further along in the research process. So let's look at some of these personas that we've identified here at EBSCO. I'm giving you a sneak peek at something my colleagues created, and I'm not sure that I guess they're aware I'm doing this, but this is nothing other than internal research we've done, but I think it's a very good mapping tool for when we look at someone who comes to you with a question in a research environment. So this is from an academic research project. So let's put that up front, that we did not talk to corporate users yet in this paradigm. However, if I think about R&D, it's the closest thing in a corporate setting to an academic research environment you're going to have. Anyway, the way that my colleagues have identified these personas is we have 4 types of searchers: the career researcher, the research enthusiast, the disengaged researcher, and the overwhelmed researcher. These run along this matrix, which is investment on one category and skills on the other. So if someone is highly skilled and highly motivated, we would call them the career researcher. If someone is very skilled but not at all motivated, they're disengaged. They're very casual. If they're very excited but don't know what they're doing, they're the enthusiast, but they need to be helped along. Then if they're in that bottom left corner where they don't know and they don't care, well, maybe we don't want to be working with them as much. But the question becomes, when someone comes to you, and this isn't just in R&D, this could be across any part of your company. When they come to you with a research question or a research challenge, you can assess to what extent they have skills or they have motivation. And then you can help them either become more motivated or become more skilled. Now, the way we would do that, of course, is through the reference interview. Now, if they come to you and versus via phone call or in person, you can conduct that reference interview with them directly, and that'll be highly effective. But if they don't come to you, the question becomes, how do we create and conduct a virtual reference interview with these end users so that we can still understand what their current state is and align them to where they need to be? So this is the trick where I think the user experience and working with you, we can pull them forward via this interview process. So the question becomes, what kind of a searcher are you today when you came to me? Are you motivated or not? Other thing we have to understand is sometimes we only get one shot at this with these people. And if we overwhelm them with a range of options and all the detailed glory of what our system can do, and really all they had was a very simple lookup question, we may actually lose them and drive them away from us to something like a Google because they don't want that personal interactive experience. They simply want the information and they want to leave. So we want to make sure that we match our attention and our indication of capabilities to their need. And the other thing we want to figure out is, when am I going to see this person again? How persistent is their need? Is this a one-time lookup and they'll probably never be back again? Will they be looking up things on a regular basis? Or are they a member of a research team where their primary job is to monitor a situation and keep the rest of the group updated on a technology as it evolves, or a product as it behaves in the marketplace, or a molecule as it moves through a development process, whatever that may be. So this is the question we have to assess, because the more continuous their need, the more skills they're going to have to stay up to date, and then hopefully the more motivated they are. So how do we support those people who are the adept researchers who are motivated to do more in the R&D space? This, to my mind, is what we would call an expert researcher. We want to help them get where they need to go with the information faster. This is where one would provide shortcuts that enable them to skip certain steps and organize content around known frameworks that are specific to the workflows they're in. If you can present information in a way that they have been classically trained to look at information, it will do two things. It will speed their process, and that's good for all of us, but it also creates credibility for the library and for you, and brings them back to you again and again, because now they connote you with a credible, easy research experience. And right now, they're actually usually looking at Google Scholar as that credible, easy research experience. I'm not sure it always is. So we can create enthusiasm through ease of use, and that can be through faster access to qualified full text. One of the things we don't want to overlook is that instant gratification need, where they find that golden record, they find that article that they want to read, and it's not available to them. So if we can make that article available to them quickly, that's great. Either it's full text that you have through an e-journal subscription or through a full text database. Maybe it's a link to some other resource that they can legally access it through a full text finding link. Perhaps it's just a very straightforward document delivery request tool. Whatever the case may be, we want to make sure we can get them that full text quickly. It's probably the main touch point for a lot of these researchers. When they want something, if you can get it to them quickly, that builds that credibility very fast. To the extent we can be more contextual about how they work with information, contextual search building tools and presentation results means things like, if they know how to search in a patent environment, are we presenting the information in a way that they can search? Do we make it easy, for example, to find patent class codes or patent families, which is a very common way to search in a patent data set? Is that easily found and easily searched upon? If we're presenting information back, are we organizing it in a way that they would expect to see it organized, so that they can quickly jump to the area of information in the framework that they understand? Really, in my mind, an advanced searcher is about refining searches via what I call progressive disclosure. As they tell us more about what they want, we volunteer more information or options to them that are more specific to what they're asking for. We don't want to confront the user with every search choice, every facet, every limiter right away. We need to find out what they want and then target to them what they're looking for. This, in a sense, is that concept of a virtual reference interview that the user experience can create as the user comes forward if they haven't told us up front who and what they are and what they want. If you can be credible, which is if you can give them quality results quickly and easily in a way that they think that you understand their need, again, the frameworks display that. I think we create loyalty, and then they come back to us again and again and again. And by us, I mean you, the librarian. If it's EBSCO as the vendor, us as the vendor inside the library. So our interests are totally aligned in this objective. Again, I think our biggest competitor out there is going to be Google Scholar. And I speak on behalf of all vendors when I say that, whether it's ProQuest or Ovid or Gale or anybody. You know, if they're not coming to you and using EBSCO, they're probably going out to the web. that may or may not be the right place to go. So, credibility drivers. Let's talk about a few things in more detail, what I think helps us to make the library more credible. Categorization is key. Again, if they're searching in chemicals, are you presenting chemical numbers in an easy way to find them? Are you searching in patents? Is that being presented in an easy way to find it? Use classification schema that they understand. If they're medical research and they know about mesh, make sure those mesh headings are available and easily found and manipulated in their search and retrieval methods. If they're in engineering and they know about InSpec, make sure the new InSpec indexing is available for them to use. Some of the research methodologies that are out there can be applied as well. One example I know in medical research is the concept of PICO, which is how we investigate certain medical problems, and it's like population, intervention, cure, and outcome, or something like that, are the 4 letters that PICO means. But what it does is it organizes information around these notions of clinical reference, so that as a clinical researcher, I know what these mean, and you bucketed the content accordingly. The other thing we saw was collaboration is critical. We should make it very easy for these searchers to share what they find, save what they've done. So a lot of UXs will try to provide collaboration tools. Others will just point people easily to existing collaboration tools that are out there, whatever they may be. Perhaps the organization has a virtual lab notebook. Perhaps they're just using SharePoint. Maybe they're using Microsoft Teams, whatever it may be. We should make sure that the users can share search strings and outcomes in an ethical way, so we're not necessarily always moving the full text documents around, but certainly the links to those documents, so that the appropriate work groups can see what was done. Also, we should help those users to see what their colleagues and peers have done asynchronously. So that is, if you're doing research today, here's what other people in the organization did yesterday or a year ago around that same search. Others search for this, for example, as a type of a tool that one can use. So if somebody starts looking in one area with certain search strings, we can identify what those are. We can suggest similar strings later. So I think that, as a library, I said you guys are on your own. Well, you've got your vendor at your side, and people like EBSCO and other vendors can help you in this information literacy quest to improve how our R&D users are using information. So we should always expect that the vendor is enabling the content itself to be as effective as it can be in terms of how it will be used. So what kind of tagging and indexing does the vendor bring to the table? Do they create taxonomies? And if so, who are the experts that are creating and maintaining those taxonomies? Are they presenting other ways to view results like knowledge graphs and things like that? When they present the results, are they giving you the contextually specific limiters and expanders that work with the data sets or the workflows that are involved? The other thing that you should be demanding, I think, is consistency across sources. So, you're going to use more than one vendor. You want to make sure that the content you buy or subscribe to from all these different vendors works together. It's a simple request. So you should expect that your vendors enable that. You should expect that if you're using a discovery platform, that it can work across all the content in your organization. You should expect that if you're buying a particular data set, that it has a robust set of APIs so that it can talk to other content and vendor platforms and be used accordingly. So I think that it's your right to demand this and not put up with limitations there, because you've got to provide the best outcome to your end users that you can. So one of the things you can do also is you can expect the vendor to help you with customizations and making sure that you're always hitting the mark. So I think that you should be able to expect the vendor to give you tools to do customizing of the user experience to yourself through a good admin dashboard with good tools that enable you to make changes based upon your end user needs, or that the group has a strong professional services team that can work with you to develop a customized web service or a widget or a view that helps you to deliver the content the way that your end users want it. Likewise, you should be able to avail yourself of the subject matter expertise of your partners, your vendors. They can bring people to the table who can talk to you about how best practices are manifest in this particular research area. We can look at the utility of particular content that you're getting. Is it meeting the mark? Is it delivering the value you anticipated when you subscribe to it? You also might want to experiment with new ways to present data. So sometimes vendors can work with you on customized A/B testing to see how a particular enhancement may be received by your end users, and we can track together the efficacy of that change and either walk it back or institute it across the whole group. You should see some better analytics where you can get real insights from the analytics rather than just a spreadsheet to help you understand how well your content is being used, particularly in the light of metrics that you would create that speak to things like information literate outcomes. So, for example, this is a screenshot from inside EBSCO of our analytics tool. This is for actually a public library, but and this is an internal view that the customer can open up, and it's one of many, where they can look at usage over time and usage of particular products or interfaces or databases to see if they're meeting whatever metrics they wanted. So I won't get too deep into the details of this because it's somebody else's world, but you should be looking for these kinds of intelligence from your partner, and also expect your vendor to be able to interpret these results with you to see if they make sense to you and that they derive to an action that you can then take based upon what you've seen. Another thing that I think we can demand from our vendor partners as librarians is, how am I doing against people just like me? So one of the ways you can know how well your library or your employees are getting access to information is to compare how well you're doing with people in your peer group. So, if I'm a big energy company, how am I doing against other big energy companies? If I'm, an engineering firm in Germany, how well am I doing against other engineering firms in Germany? So one of the things that as a vendor, an EBSCO or others can bring to the table is the aggregate usage across a group of peers. All of the libraries of your type, this is how they behave on average, and then plot yourself against that group of peers to see where you stand. Are you above or below the average in terms of performance against some particular key performance indicator that we would create with you? These are just some sample ones for a public library, but you can create a whole variety of these things. And then you can see together, how are we doing? How are we working toward these objectives? These objectives are things we've created to try to drive ourselves to improved information-based outcomes in the organization. So these are the types of tools that you can use so that after you've devised your solution, you create metrics to see how well that solution is working. And then the analytics help us to check that with you and then identify ways to optimize or further adjust or continue as we're doing. Or maybe you say, you know what, this database isn't working at all. Perhaps it's a bust. We should try something else here. There's lots of different things that can come out of this. But this is one of the things I think that we can do as vendor library partners to make sure that we're hitting the mark with our information literacy objectives. Another thing we can do is remember that very often we're competing with Google or the web itself. And a lot of times even the advanced researchers and the R&D teams will start there because, again, they have this certain expectation that it's a credible place to begin, even when it may not be. So we need to be better. We need to provide content in a contextually relevant way that gets end users to what they really need in a way that they're confident that they arrived at the right solution. Remember, back to the information literacy objective is that you're able to assess quickly and effectively whether you're at the right information. We need to give them that tool. So one of the best ways is let them access the right content in the right place. So this is a sanitized view of a healthcare customer that has a lot of research teams within it, where we point the researchers to research opportunities within this larger screen. We give them their own place to start and go, which is the R&D box. Then, of course, there's a clinical trials box where a lot of them want to go as well. We also spoke to the librarians, and when we open up this page, the research page, you'll see that they were very concerned. They want to know about life sciences publications, which is in this blue line below the search box. There are particular drugs that they offer, and then there are topics that they've identified that are proprietary to them that they want to follow. Note there's a line here for topic discussion, where you can see what your peers are discussing about a particular research topic, then you can dive in yourself. And then down below, we're tracking on particular results that would be, literature and journals is essentially all the full-text scholarly databases. Patents are self-explanatory, as is in the news, which is an RSS feed. So these are just ways that one can customize a front end and appeal to a using group more specifically, but in this case, R&D. Here's another way we did this. This is another firm where I've whited out who they are and tried to sanitize to the extent I could any branding on it. But they're in the biomedical space, the pharma space actually. So this is the R&D page where they start their work. So we try to present very quickly, highly credible. We highlight the credible resources that we want them to know when they come to the library site, they get the good stuff. So in this case, Cortellis Regulatory Intelligence is a big tool that they use. So with the librarian's request, front and center. So that if you come to the library site, the first thing you're confronted with immediately is your Cortellis access, and you can do that right away. We also know that they want to look at a lot of e-journals. So up in the upper right, we put the e-journal link. We asked them, what are the key resources that your people use? And they talked, of course, about Micromedics and PatBase and PubMed and Scopus and Embase. So those are all immediately linked in the quick link section. So right away, you've got this contextual access. And what it says is the library gets it. When you come here to do research, we as the library understand what you as the researcher want. We're making it easy. We also try to anticipate what are the common requests that researchers have for the library. And this is that list of I want to. Very often they're doing things like, I want to keep current on science and business news around, whatever I'm working on. I want to know about conference information because that's where a lot of this stuff first comes out. A lot of the new ideas come out of conferences. Simple things. I want to know if we have this journal. I want to read journal of whatever it may be. They're always asking that question. So we made a very simple tool where they can look up whether that corporation has an e-journal subscription or whatever that title may be. They want to find drug information. Done. So these are all the kind of things you can do working together with your vendor to create that contextual view into content. Another example is an engineering portal that's created for a company actually in Germany. They use Science Direct and InSpec and IEEE, and they wanted those presented front and center when their people started when their engineering researchers began their research string. So I made a fake search on brazing, but the idea would be that, and the IEEE fell to the bottom of the line, but they wanted us to present immediately those content types. And that was just what they asked for because that's what their end users had required. So we did it. So again, what we're doing here is helping the end user to assess content quickly. And then we're also giving them content that is credible within a framework that they understand. They know InSpec, they know IEEE, they know Science Direct. So we're delivering those paradigms to them because it gives them the confidence that their library gets it and gives them what they need. So let's jump to a quick summary of this, and then we'll be done. So we're talking about information literacy in the discovery and research process. So I tried to do this 3-column chart. I did this myself, and we'll see how well it works. So the far right is the information literacy frameworks from the ACRL that we looked at about a half hour ago. Then in the middle, I map out a typical R&D research workflow, but only at the beginning part of an R&D process. This is when they're creating that research landscape. This is when they're doing the actual literature lookup and review portion. They're not typically looking in journals when they're in the lab or when they're doing experimentation or when they're in clinical trials or whatever they're doing there. They're looking in the databases around full text content at the beginning when they're trying to figure out where the opportunities may lie or they're doing a prior art search or a novelty check. So we want to make sure that we're helping them with that portion of the process particularly. So I tried to map the R&D research landscape development like a term paper, if you will, workflow in the middle against those ACRL frameworks. Then the light green column, we're suggesting where you as a librarian or the librarian vendor combination can provide these information literacy enablers. So one of the biggest ones is if we have to determine the nature of the extent of the information we need, got to do that reference interview. If you can't do it in person, can we build it into the user experience? And that can be through progressive disclosure. As a user starts to do searching, depending on what they click on, we can volunteer specific information back. What we're really doing is asking the question, okay, do you want A or B? They pick B. Then do you want C or D? And we're essentially progressing them through a search in a way that helps us to determine what they really want. They want to access needed information effectively and efficiently. That's all about the full text and full text linking, relevancy ranking tools, suggested search, limiters, expanders, et cetera. A lot of things you're very familiar with as librarians using any vendor's platform, to help that user evaluate information critically and pick what they need. That's all about the result view. We go back to those screenshots I showed you with the bento boxes, for example. That's pulling content into contextually relevant chunks so they can very quickly evaluate whether it's the right information or not. That's a key thing that our users are conditioned with when they do web searches. You go to a web screen of Google or even other sites and you type in your search terms, and you're confronted very often with a synthesized view of information, a little report, if you will, a little amalgamation of pictures and images and some text and some headlines, and it lets you know whether you're in the right place or not, whether you should go forward any further. That's a concept I think that researchers would welcome when they're doing their initial screens for content or information, is very quickly send them back graphical or other sorted pieces of information so they can very quickly assess if this is an avenue I want to progress down any further. Rather than presenting a full list of all these results one after the other, group them for them in another way, up front. Don't make them group it. Group it up front for them so they can very quickly assess this is the right direction for continued deep dive or not. Remember, one of the biggest complaints managers had is that newer researchers are bad at deep dives. We're going to make deep diving easy. That also includes things like metadata and landing pages, as I discussed. One of the things I have to do is support collaboration. So that's simple things like saving searches and citations and sharing them, but also seamless integration to, state-of-the-art or industry common collaboration platforms, or to company-specific collaboration tools or lab notebooks, things like that. And then finally, a thing that you care more about than perhaps your end users do, which is the legality of using information. GDPR compliance being one thing, but also, full text copyright. But that's what your vendor's there for. It's our job essentially to confirm to you that we've given you those rights, that your people can then use this stuff appropriately and get to full text fast. So this is an idea of some very simple things that can be done to move your user along an information literacy continuum to become more information literate, whether they know it or not, and get to a better outcome. So longer term, this I believe is the last slide, some things I think librarians can do. The first thing is I've noticed there's a fundamental disconnect between corporate learning and the corporate library. So a lot of companies spend a great deal of money training their employees and demanding that they master specific competencies within the organization. And as they progress, they have to master new competencies. I think that the corporate librarian, if not already doing so, should be able to instill into that competency map at the company information literacy-based competencies. That if the researcher or the employee masters these skills, they should be better able to work with information within our company. And you people are the best skilled people to make those recommendations. It's a difficult thing to reach across to corporate learning, but I think it's an opportunity for all of us is to connect the library and information use skills people to the corporate learning team for the benefit of the people who are taking the corporate trainings. Also, I talked about those personas. If you talk to the R&D and operational managers, I'm sure quite a few of you do, you can try to map various people in the organization against those personas to see if we can move them into, the next level of skill or the next level of enthusiasm by various techniques within the interface or within your interactions with them. And then finally, as I was showing you, I think you should demand that your vendors participate and help us help you. Let us work with you on building these information literacy enablers into the user experience. Let's work with you to optimize the information mix. What subscription should you have versus what databases you should be using, et cetera. Let's talk about bringing information into end user workflows, including mobile and remote workflows, as opposed to just them logging in at their desk. So this is the end of my discussion, and I want to thank you for that 45 minutes, and hopefully we have some time for some questions.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So we are going to open the session up to questions. If you do have a question for Joe, please feel free to enter it into the chat box right now. So, Joe, I have two questions for you. So one of the questions is kind of related to these personas and then also creating how you referenced these customized landing pages based on, say, a particular department, area of focus, et cetera. The question is, if you're in a large-scale company where you have many departments and you want to create those customized sort of landing pages like you showed, how can that be achieved on a large scale if you have a small team that would be managing that?
Yeah, the simple answer is if you're a small team, you should see if the vendor can help you do that. And in our case, it would be multiple landing pages as a capability that we could help you design. The limitation, if one exists, is they would all share a core frame, but then they would have specific differences, content that's presented, topics that are presented, where the content appears, et cetera, limiters that are available depending on if they're marketing or R&D or if they're in clinical trials versus pharmacovigilance, whatever it may be. We can structure around that, but that I think is the simplest way. Is it's the starting page can be made different pretty easily, rather than constructing different databases internally. It's the same data sets, just different filtering views into those data sets. Great.
And then the second question is for essentially a lot of companies, even if they have a focus, say in particular design or architecture, they still have to conduct some level of R&D, although the content types that they may want to access may be different than, say, someone in a biotech or pharma. So in terms of multimedia, in terms of other content items outside of journals like ebooks or magazines, is there a way, you did show examples that were kind of more specific to, is there a way, I guess the question is, for companies that have that sort of focus, say a design agency, to be able to still utilize a platform in the same manner that a biotech or a pharma company would be utilizing a platform like that, and just ingesting or I guess presenting different content types that are more multimedia or kind of more ebook or magazine focused?
Yeah, yes. The short answer is yes. From the back end where I sit, it's all about how well we can activate the underlying content with indexing. So it could be video files, it could be a large library of videos or images, or it could just be a file of databases, of data sets. As long as they're tagged, they can be found. And what we may render is not, of course, the full video, but we'll point you to the video with enough descriptors that the end user can determine whether that video is worth watching or acquiring, or enough descriptors that they can figure that that data set's one worth using. So yeah, they're just data objects. So it's just a question of enabling the object to be used in whatever the workflow is at that organization. I went back to the concept of frame. So however we want to do it, we organize the content around those known paradigms. So if you're in a design firm, there's different ways you look at it than if you're in an R&D firm doing a drug. We get that. It's just about, is the underlying content able to be searched in a way that it can be searched alongside other stuff, which means is there commonly shared indexing. And then the other part of it is porting out to the content in its native environment. Very often, you might be going to somebody else's platform to use the content in the platform in which it was best designed to be used, including viewing videos or looking at trademark information, designs and trademarks, which is a big thing for designers. Or if it's in chemicals, maybe going to a chemical, like a site that has Marcouche, chemical searching tools. Yeah, you just pump out to those for that part of the experience. So you require an API that's robust enough to pass people back and forth seamlessly with enough metadata to make that exchange effective that they can still progress down whatever their research path is. But short answer is yes, you can do that.
Great. Okay, so those were the two questions that we had for you. So we are now going to wrap up the session. So I wanted to thank everyone who's attended today. Thank you for taking the time to attend this session and ask your questions. I hope that you found the session engaging and informative. Also, a big thanks to Joe for sharing his insights. As I mentioned at the start of the session, if you're interested in learning more about the tools and services that EBSCO offers, offers that can help optimize the research experience and improve information literacy, please stay on the line. You'll be redirected to a page to request more information. Again, thank you for attending today's session, and thank you, Joe. And we will hopefully see you soon back at one of our webcasts. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.